Welcome back to the UK House, the home of creativity. Don't forget to join in the conversation on social to be in with a chance to win a Cannes Lions membership. Simply use the hashtag UK@CannesLions to enter, and we'll be announcing the winner tomorrow. Next up, we're going to hear from South by Southwest favourites, HeyHuman. HeyHuman use their understanding of how our brains connect with the world and make choices to inspire thinking and ideas for brands all around the world. I'm delighted to welcome Neil Davison, CEO of HeyHuman. Neil's going to be sharing insights into how successful brand growth was transformed in 2020 and what brands need to learn from the pandemic. In what I am calling a UK House exclusive, HeyHuman will share learnings from the pandemic and their neuroscience research. Again, this is a live session, so please do submit your questions via the Slido chat to the right of the main stage. We'll be putting questions to Neil at the end of his session. So I'm going to welcome Neil to the house, who has the most impressive background that has been in UK House and South by Southwest and possibly now Cannes Lions as well.
It's growing. The whiskey collection.
Welcome to the UK House, Neil. I'm going to hand over to you for your presentation.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ashley. So, yes, good afternoon. And I am going to be talking about brand dispersion and what it means to be a brand in 2021 and beyond. Now, what gives us the kind of insight to say that? I suppose for us, two things. One, HeyHuman is a creative agency, and obviously we've been working with our clients, talking to people through the last 2 years of the pandemic, let's say 2020, 2021. And also, obviously, the last 7 years, we've seen a lot of things happening that I think feed into what's going on at the minute. And then on the other side, HeyHuman is our neuroscience focused agency delivering marketing effectiveness. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that we saw through that as well. Yeah. So I think this is a great quote to start off with. The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I think that is very much the truth of what I'm going to talk about now. Is I think there's a danger that sometimes we talk about everything that's happened through the pandemic as if it's come out of nowhere. But actually, I think when you look, most of these things were here. They were just massively accelerated. So with that in mind, I think it's fair to say that what we describe as brand dispersion was already here. It was just accelerated by COVID-19. And what I mean by brand dispersion is the rise of new channels and offers that are now connecting better with people's needs. And I don't really need to kind of explain that because we're all living them, but they're basically bypassing the legacy channels and they're removing unnecessary friction. Now, the obvious one would be Amazon, and there's lots of others that in other categories that we can talk about as well that we're all starting to see. And then on the flip side, the brand bit is how people's behaviours and their relationships with brands have changed. Now, yet again, I think I'd be saying, it's happened massively last 2 years. But actually, I hope I can demonstrate most of it was already here. So brand dispersion, I'm going to talk about these challenges. That is really capturing the challenge we've got now and the challenge that we're going to have to deal with the future. Ease versus engagement, meaningful friction versus being friction-free, being immersed in a brand versus agile activation, and just the whole thing about a whole new approach to brands. And as I said, I think our research over the last 7 years has shown that the future was kind of here already. So our research showed there was a new relationship around fleeting brand relationships that we talked about is Generation Tinder. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But also the realities of what we call cognitive load sweet spot and content engagement. Because basically we have seen that throughout the customer journey, through experiences, through content, there are cognitive load sweet spots that were here already. It wasn't just because of the pandemic. And then on the flip side, we have tested through neuroscience and proven that meaningful brand experiences with that added friction actually drive purchase intent far better than, say, mass things like sampling. And then on the other flip side, we've also proven that removing friction in D2C actually massively changes sales conversion. And then I'm also going to talk about, from a neuroscience perspective, how the reality of prioritizing sustainability really sits with consumers. So some learnings from 2020, and this is really, it's not my view of the world, it's my view of the world based on what clients, prospects, people that are brand owners have been telling us. I think the big thing, and yet again, we've all seen it, some brands were actually slow to respond to the crisis. And, whilst you would have thought there was a playbook for the crisis or a crisis, there wasn't really. We were arguing about, is it right to advertise? Is it wrong to advertise? Should you invest? Shouldn't you invest? And then when we got past things like that, many of the messages were actually off message because a lot of them were too late and they weren't actually chiming with where people were at the time. And then another flip side to that was, and yet again, it's brand owners reflecting on it, saying in retrospect, they were agile without actual brand meaning. And why was that? That was because a lot of the brand foundations weren't actually fit for purpose in a crisis. And when brands did respond in an agile way or quicker than usual, they discovered that a lot of stakeholders lacked a shared understanding and interpretation about what the brand really, really stood for. And that only became obvious in a crisis. And also, many people didn't care about world issues. I'll go back one. Yeah, so in the midst of the crisis, lots of brand owners said that the people would never be the same again. And, at the end of the day, it's our job to understand brands, but it's also key to understand people. And, many conversations, particularly with brands with purpose, said, there was going to be a mass outbreak of mindfulness and kindness because of the power of how it felt at that time. But actually, I would argue, and I think the research backs it up, a lot, from a mass point, a lot of people haven't really changed. And, that's been proven for us because, the world issues like sustainability, people have told us in groups and research and feedback that they really care about the planet more than ever. The reality, when we test that in a neuroscience way, where they're not verbalizing, is it isn't yet the priority for the mass. And then in terms of things like the EY Consumer Index, when they segment macro level audiences, only 16% of people would be described as planet first. So what does it really mean to be a future brand? We talked about brand dispersion. I'm now going to talk about human brands because we have seen these accelerated by brand dispersion and everything that's happened around the pandemic. And these are the brands that recognized before the pandemic that the relationships and connections with people had changed, and they acted on it and they made the most of fleeting connections. And, that is partly about a business model, and it's also about how they connected. And they did this through 4 particular behaviours that we identified in our work over the last 7 years, which were active listening, simplifying, speaking clearly, and actively adapting. And, as far back as 2014, these brand relationships were obvious to us. And we talked about 14 new brand relationships focused on, more shallow and fleeting connections that actually work for people. So things like flings and friends with benefits. And then also more illuminating, deeper relationships that were once simply described as brand love. So, we talked about Generation Tinder's 14 plus relationships, and these are the kind of things that I've just talked about. So different ways to articulate brand love. So things like committed partnerships, but also, like I say, people saying it's okay. And this is people saying it, not brands, to have a fling, a friends with benefit relationship or a casual acquaintance with a brand. That's what I want now. It's not what legacy brands want. So for us, it's very much been the future for brands is about embracing these human brand behaviors for the future. So, starting off with fixing those brand weaknesses that we identify through talking to brand owners, but also maximizing fleeting brand relationships and connections. And they're really focused on active listening, simplifying, speaking clearly, and actively adapting. So I'm going to break down those brand behaviors that we see as being right for the pandemic, and then also right for the future. So I think the first point is brands are going to need to listen differently, because I hope I've kind of brought it to life. 2020 proved the power of now, that people overstated how they were going to feel in the future, how they were going to behave in the future, even brand owners, and actually misarticulated the why behind these. I think many things that if we'd acted on as brands or businesses for 3 months' time, based on what people were saying, we would have got wrong. And, it's always been the case in recent years, but now ever more so, that brands need to turn to new tools for these insights, focus groups, people explaining themselves, etc., just don't work anymore. But on the flip side, I think one of the things that we saw through the pandemic is people focus too much on changing human. Everything has changed. Nobody's going to be the same again. But actually, the reality is, when you think about unchanging man, many of the behaviors and beliefs, as they turned out, could have been predicted by understanding, our ongoing need for security, for love, for sociability, and those kind of things. So the trick is really doing that with agility. Okay. So the second point is really that brands will need to balance simplifying and enhancing. So, we have seen through all our neuroscience research that there are cognitive sweet spots that predict human connection with brands, ideas, and experiences, even despite brand dispersion. So get those right, and you've nailed your brand connections. So, for brands, it's going to be about attacking meaningless friction. And that might be, the basis of building a brand or a business, or it might be the basis of fixing a legacy brand and business, but also consciously adding friction where it matters in the customer journey, because it does still matter. So we've stopped really talking about legacy experiential, but we've started talking about everywhere experiences. So not coming to something out in the world. It could be coming to something out in the world, but it could also be in home. It could be in digital. And it's understanding the kind of friction needed for that. And then be clear why a brand matters in lives now. So what we're seeing is the rising importance of easy goodness. So do good things and communicate them in good ways, connecting with people before the great purpose you might have. So why an organization exists, what its people believe in, and what the brand stands for doesn't guarantee mass connection and growth. And the mass point is really important. And so, it's by shifting from goodness credentials to making this meaningful and accessible that will be the difference. And Oatly is a really, really good example of that. Oatly has been around far longer than people think, but it's how they've reframed their benefits and their offer that's made the difference. So, in conclusion, I think human brands will continue to adapt to new brand relationships and this accelerating brand dispersion. And I think the important point is brand dispersion will keep going. We've seen it in retail, we've seen it in lots of areas, but it's going to go into medicine, it's going to go into health, it's going to go into education. So it's going to keep going. So it's about living those 4 key behaviors. And I think the one thing is living them all. So one brand that I'll pick on just at the end, we might have chosen 6 months ago as a real human brand, is Brewdog. Now, Brewdog, personally, and I think most people would agree, has fallen down on the active listening behavior. And because of that, it's kind of lost its allure as a human brand. So it's not easy, and some will fall short of a challenging benchmark, but it's really about living all those 4 key behaviors that is going to make the difference for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. This isn't a question. I guess it's just more of a an observation, because as part of our introduction to UK House, we were talking about what were the key themes around UK wins, and we were talking a lot about empathy. There's been a lot of articles written about all winners, where there was a focus in on purpose, and I just found it really interesting what you were saying. That is that what we're going to see? Do you think in next year's Cannes Lions winners, or will we see something a little bit different based on your neuroscience research?
Yeah, how to put this? What people want and what sometimes the industry think they want. Sometimes we get it bang on, sometimes we don't. So it's quite hard to say. I think that to answer your question slightly differently, Ashley, I think the really important thing to realise is people do want to connect with the good things that brands do and businesses do, but sometimes we make it hard for people to connect with it. Like I said, I think it is communicating that empathy and making it easy to connect with. And that's why I say Oatly is a great example. I can't remember how many years it's been around, but it's a lot longer than you think. It just feels like it's a great brand now because they've wrapped a great product in something that makes it easy to get. And I think, so that's probably my version of empathy.
Thank you very much, Neil. Thank you for joining us in UK House. You can connect with Neil if you have questions for him via the Hop-in networking function in the People tab. And we're also providing the LinkedIn details for each of our speakers, so do get in touch with them. We're going to take another quick short break, but again, don't go away, because coming up we have Cannes Lions winners Adam and Eve DDB.